To you who once called home mountains, plains, and forests, a social animal, fierce, proud, wandering with free reins. Your pack was your life, hunting party, nighttime security. You always felt at peace, tucked in with the family. Time proved our chemistry was much more than a trend. Now, they even say that you're my closest friend. I taught you to protect us and to guide our way. From you I learned the true meaning of love, trust, and play. Nowadays your pack has evolved in nature. You've become accustomed to a different pasture, far away from your own and the peace of a tribe, in a world emitting a hectic hustle vibe. I realized changes could be hard on you. I'll do my best to see your needs attended to. You, my dog, my friend, my faithful companion. You deserve to be happy. It's my #1 mission.
Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to have all of you online, and we are looking very much forward to this webinar this evening. Pheromones, all in the nose or not, the science of canine well-being. So I'd like to firstly introduce ourselves. That's myself, Quixie Sontag, and Aileen Pipers, from Cape Town. I'm speaking to you from Pretoria, and I see that most of our participants are also from all the corners of South Africa, and I even saw somebody from Hamburg in Germany. So welcome to all of you, wherever you are listening in from. We'd like to make this a really interactive evening, and you are welcome to participate. The participants this evening are veterinarians, veterinary nurses, and practice staff as well. The format of our presentation is a part of a bit of a presentation followed by a small gap for discussions and questions and answers. So we're not going to do the whole presentation and then only have questions right at the back. So please feel free to also post your questions in the Q&A box. You can use the chat for just chatting, doing comments, etc. And you are welcome to also put up your hand and speak. So there are opportunities to participate. Please use them. We would also like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a lucky draw this evening to 10 lucky participants. So what's going to happen is the host will put up a link to a very short questionnaire, and if you can answer those 2 questions correctly, then you will be in the draw for a lovely book prize and also a product sample. So please keep your eye on the chat, because Madeleine will post the link there, and keep your attention on it so that you don't forget, so that you answer those questions by the end of the evening. Right, so I'm not going to do any more talking. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Aileen Pipers from Cape Town. She will do a section, then I will do a section, and then Aileen will end off the webinar again. So please sit back and enjoy yourselves.
Thanks, Quixie. Don't sit back. Get your fingers on the keyboards, because we do want to hear all your comments. Perhaps you've had some experience with pheromone products. Perhaps you've got some cases where you've tried it and it's worked that you'd like to share. So please pop those things into the chat, as Quixie said, and then also your questions. If you can specifically put your questions in the Q&A, then it just helps us to keep track that we have actually answered them and that we don't miss any of them. All right, so we're going to go through canine fear, anxiety, and stress, and then behavior as part of holistic care, the physiology of pheromones, and the role of pheromones in behavior management. So let's start off with canine fear, anxiety, and stress. And it's always helpful to clarify exactly what it is that we're talking about, because the terms fear, anxiety, and stress, and if you read the literature, you'll sometimes see it referred to as FAS, F-A-S, are terms that I think we all use all the time, but perhaps not always in a way that stays true to their actual meaning. So what is that meaning? Let's start off with fear. Now, behavioral medicine is still in its infancy, and so a lot of terminology and definitions have not been sufficiently standardized. However, the ones that follow have been widely accepted as being good definitions. So fear is defined as an emotional response due to the presence or proximity of a specific stimulus that is perceived as a threat or danger. Now, this can be normal, and in fact, it is normal and adaptive. If you were never scared of anything, you would not last very long, because fear protects us. And a key feature of fear is that the behavior is directional. It is related to the location of the stimulus. You can generally work out what the dog is scared of or what the cat is scared of. So the dog is scared of other dogs, or a cat that is scared of the cat carrier, or a dog that is scared of loud noises and is looking for the source of the noise. And it's also important to note that fear occurs in response to things that the animal perceives as a threat. So previous learning, which is characterized by habituation as well as classical conditioning, this interacts with the genetic background of each individual to modulate emotional reactivity. So you can have a litter of puppies, and you can have one puppy who is naturally more fearful, and who then responds fearfully to things that another puppy doesn't. And a key example of this is the way that we greet dogs. Now, most people greet dogs by, sorry, I see somebody's saying that my sound is very soft. Let me just see if I can turn that up a little bit. Okay, I hope that is a bit better. Carrie Ann, if you can just say,
yes.
Otherwise.
Eileen,
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, I see all the thumbs up coming through. So most people greet dogs by bending towards them and stretching out their hand, thinking that this is a very friendly gesture. However, if you can appreciate Dr. Sophia Yin's photo here of how dogs may actually perceive this gesture and why they will then want to shy away from people. So generally, behaviorists advocate for interacting with dogs by crouching down to their level, turning your body slightly away so that you side onto them, that you're not facing them directly and that you're not bending over them, and then offering your hand for them to sniff before you then try and touch their head in any way. So again, it's not about what we think is fear-inducing. It's about what the animal perceives as fear-inducing. Now, phobia is a whole different class of fear. It is a profound, excessive, abnormal fear response that either occurs without the presence of a true threat or is out of proportion to the response needed for dealing with an actual threat. So phobic fears are problematic because they interfere with normal behavior. And there's usually a threshold point where the fear becomes intense and unrelated to the intensity of the stimulus. So at some point, a dog with thunderstorm phobia no matter how much closer the storm gets, the dog's fear doesn't increase. It goes over a threshold, and then they're just in full-on panic mode, and they're just trying to get away, or they're trying to hide, or they're trying to climb into the owner's clothing to get that sort of comfort from an attachment figure. And phobias also usually persist long after the actual threat has ceased. And that's one of the ways that we can distinguish a phobia from a fear. Now, anxiety is defined as the anticipation of threat. And it's usually considered a more general state of distress, so more long-lasting, prompted by less explicit or more generalized cues, involving physiological arousal, but often without organized functional behavior. So essentially, we have a stress response in the body, we have a physiological response in the body, but then this doesn't turn into your typical fight or flight or fiddle or freeze response that you get with a fear response. You instead get this behavior that doesn't necessarily correlate with trying to deal with the problem. So the behavior the animal is exhibiting, such as panting or pacing, it's not goal-directed in a way that's scrabbling at a door to get out of the consult room. In that case, the dog is scared of being in the consult room. They know that the door is the exit point. They're trying to escape, and that is their way of dealing with it. If they're just anxious, they're not necessarily sure at what they're scared of yet. They just know that something scary is about to happen. And so the behavior that we see is much more non-specific. And if you think about the times that you possibly chew your nails or tap your fingers or shake your leg or any of those sorts of things that you use as a way to self-soothe when you're feeling anxious. Now, it's important to note that you can have fear without anxiety, but you can have anxiety without fear. All right. The animal is scared of something. So either being handled by strangers, being separated from a primary attachment figure, traveling in the car, and either with repeated exposure to this fear-inducing trigger or a single extreme fear-inducing event, anxiety then develops as a protective emotion to help the animal to avoid the fear-inducing trigger in future. So once again, anxiety is a normal adaptive response that becomes problematic when it starts to impact on the animal's quality of life. So our goal is never to have animals that never experience anxiety. We just want them to experience less anxiety that is then impacting on their normal lives. Now, stress is when the body detects stresses, it responds by releasing stress hormones, and stresses can be challenges in the internal or the external environment. Okay, so something happening outside that is then detected by the animal's senses and processed, that information is processed in the brain and perceived as being stressful, or an internal state such as blood glucose dropping too low. That creates a bit of stress in the animal's body, and then we've got all these responses that take place as an attempt to achieve homeostasis and bring that blood sugar back to normal. So triggers in the environment can cause a stress response, but so can the emotion of anxiety, right? It doesn't just have to be something physiological like your blood sugar, like glucose dropping. It can be the emotion of anxiety. And equally, repeated exposure to a trigger that induces a stress response can also then cause anxiety. So I was recently at the dentist, and as I walked in, and that sort of like combination of smell and sound, I just got this like nauseous feeling in my stomach, because I knew what was kind of coming, the uncomfortableness and fingers in your mouth and instruments, and not pleasant. So that repeated exposure to a trigger that induces a stress response has then led to a little bit of dental anxiety for me. All right, so if you can now start, that's why I said you have to warm your fingers up. So if you can start listing some signs of anxiety. So how many signs of anxiety you think there are in dogs, and then some of the signs that you associate as being signs of anxiety. Okay. Olebo Heng says licking lips. Marcel says panting, pacing, side eyes. Andrea, yes. It's starting as shaking, salivation, whale eye, tail tucked in between the legs, urinating, shivering. I did see some others here. Tight mouth, low head carriage, avoiding eye contact, yawning, emptying anal glands. Yes, I think many vets are familiar with that. Ears pinned back, chattering of teeth, being clingy, withdrawal. Yeah. All right. So indeed, there are many signs, non-specific signs of anxiety in dogs. And if we can roughly divide these into, we can have changes in physiology, we can have changes in behavior, and we can have changes in body language. So things such as the lowered head carriage that somebody mentioned, the shifting legs, the lifting paw, escaping or escape attempts, those are all changes in behavior. In body language. Then we've got changes in behavior like escaping or escape attempts, and then changes in physiology such as trembling or shaking, muscle rigidity, lip licking, etc. So Renee has mentioned tail wag. So yes, a tail wag is not always a sign of a happy dog. Sometimes a tail wag can be a sign of a stressed dog. So taking all of this into a consideration, and it is important that you look at the overall picture. So what else is the dog doing to really put together this picture of, is this animal feeling anxious or not? And it's also important to look at the context. So what happened just before you saw this particular behavior? The lowering of the head and neck. Was it in relation to interacting with another dog, or, for instance, a person putting out their hand to stroke the dog? And then how can we then interpret that behavior? So based on that, do you think that we are missing signs of stress in dogs? And if so, are there any things that you think we can do to become more aware? So how can we become more aware? And again, you are welcome to pop it into the chat, or if you'd like to speak, you are welcome to put up your hand, and Madeleine will enable you to say something. So while I'm waiting for your responses to come in, so Wilmarie has said whale eye and dilated pupils. And I just wanted to quickly mention that whale eye is a very specific behavioral response that we see that is generated by the animal trying to move away from the fear-inducing trigger, but also keep their eye on it. So they want to watch it. I don't know if you've ever had a spider in the room and you want to get something to get rid of the spider, but you don't want the spider to disappear while you're not looking. So you're also trying to look at it and move away. And that's then what produces the whale eye. So as the dog is turning away, but also looking at the thing, you start to see the whites of their eyes. All right, so let's missing it when it's very subtle. Leboheng has said that. Yes, that is absolutely correct. That sometimes these signs can be quite subtle. And when you are busy and you're trying to get patients into the consult room and get your clinical exam done and chat to the owner, sometimes you don't have the capacity to be focusing solely on the body language and behavior that the patient is exhibiting. Robin has said, learn more about the signs of stress in dogs. Yes, by attending webinars like these. Natalie has said, read body language and back off. Now, that's a very important point because part of doing a clinical exam is having to touch a patient. So sometimes backing off means that you're unable to touch the patient. So do you have some ideas of how you could then actually complete your physical exam when you have a patient who's showing signs of anxiety? And then Llewellyn has said, definitely, I think social media for clinics is important to educate clients on all the symptoms so owners can also pick it up in their pets and treat accordingly. That's a very good point, Llewellyn, because oftentimes owners don't notice this. And you as the vet can see that the patient is stressed. And then you say to the owner, oh, you know, maybe we should reschedule this vaccination, and you can take some, you know, you can take a pheromone collar and or use some pheromone products or use something else and bring your pet back the next time, or do a few friendly visits to the clinic, and then let's see if we can have a less stressed patient for that vaccination. And then the owner's like, oh no, my dog is not stressed, but you can see that they are quite stressed. Sune says, yes, we are missing signs. Helps to look at experts analyzing pet body language to practice recognizing it yourself. Yes, much like any language, the more you practice, the better, the more fluent you become. And I personally love going to dog parks, and I mean, part of my job is I like watch dogs all the time when they come into my consult room. So I love watching them and trying to really pick up on the subtle ways of how they sort of communicating with the owner, who again is sometimes, you know, not cognizant of that. Carla is saying we do see it, but limit time and amount of patients that needs help causes you to try and move past it as soon as possible. Yes, that is indeed a problem, is that we do need to get through a day and get through the patients that you need to see. But I think Llewellyn's point about using the social media tools there that are available to us as a way of educating the public can be quite helpful. Michelle is saying destructive behavior. Certainly, destructive behavior can be a sign of stress and anxiety. And Elfrida is saying, especially if owners attempt to mask behavior in consultation. Yes, and perhaps the owner is also feeling a little bit anxious, and so they're kind of using their dog to alleviate their own anxiety. Raisa is saying, not so much missing the signs, but perhaps overlooking them and not doing enough to comfort or to help them. Yes, and so we're very glad that you've joined the webinar tonight, because that we hope that we'll be able to help you with a little bit of that. Donald Leesk is saying take time to watch from a distance first. Yes, that's always a very good approach. Just give the dog a little bit of a time to acclimatize to the room. Yes, put your shoes in the animal's shoes. Yes, Carla. And also noting previous stressed animals if they are repeat clients, and adding time to their consult as to not stress them more. Listen to owners, they usually notice signs and hear them. Annalie, that is a fantastic point that you've made, and something that I fully agree with. I often get histories from vets, patients that are coming to me, and there's often very little that's been mentioned about the animal's behavior. So just popping a clinical note in there, you know, was very stressed, you know, and for follow-up later, that something can then be done about that. Okay, I'm sure there are lots of very helpful things that are being said here, but I don't want to take up too much of Quixie's time. So I'm going to let Quixie move on to our next section. And if we've got some time at the end, we can circle back to some of these and discuss them in some more detail. And while
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aileen. So in the second part of the presentation, we're talking about behavior as part of holistic care. So what do we mean with holistic care? The meaning of the word is parts that are interconnected and can be explained only by reference to the whole. So in medicine and in veterinary science, it usually refers to the treatment of the whole person or the whole animal. We can go to the next slide. So if we look at people and how health is defined in people by the World Health Organization, they refer to a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So what this refers to is really the concept of flourishing, which is, it's more than just not feeling horrible. It's more than just not being sick. It's actually feeling really good and doing really well and being able to flourish. So the concept of flourishing or thriving can also be applied to animals. And if we then look at how we can apply this concept in animals, which is on the next slide, we can also refer to the physical, mental, and social health of the animals. And the concept of flourishing when it comes to animal welfare is usually referred to as positive animal welfare, which is a relatively new concept in animals. So it's more than just avoiding unnecessary suffering, preventing disease, preventing problems. It's actually finding ways to ensure that these animals are really doing the best they possibly can. And we know that welfare exists on a continuum of an animal can have really good welfare or really poor welfare and everything in between. And I think that with small animals in veterinary science, we actually have an opportunity to move towards the flourishing side, the positive welfare side. So we need to try and move away from just addressing challenges when it comes to the mental health of our patients to also ensuring the best possible mental health. But let's have a look at all these aspects separately quickly. In veterinary science, obviously physical health is our job. That's what we do. And this comprises of ways to prevent problems, as in vaccinations, parasite control, everything that you do every day, but also treating problems. And this is where, especially small animal medicine, has come so far. We're treating cancers and orthopedics and internal medicine issues that we were not able to treat when I qualified as a vet. So we are making good progress here, but what about the mental health aspect? And are we doing enough for our patients in this area? So what it refers to is really minimizing stress, and we're better to do it than in our own practices. Helping our clients teach their pets resilience, learning how to respect emotional needs and satisfy behavioral needs, and also teaching our clients what that means. And I think that the concept of safety is often overlooked, and here we refer to physical direct safety as well as the psychological safety that animals need, just like we need those things. So the low stress experience in a veterinary practice is beginning to be really well documented, and there are some really good books and articles available on that. And I know that some practices have already done the low stress program that is available. So I think this is one area where, as vets, we can really make a big difference and ensure that our patients, at least, enjoy the highest level of psychological well-being. If we look at the social aspects of animal well-being, here we refer to the social needs of dogs and all mammals. In fact, all animals that are group animals have a very important social life that plays a very important role in their overall well-being. And we've already mentioned things like learning to read dog body language and to interpret it. It's one thing reading it, it's another thing actually accurately interpreting the whole picture. We also need to know how to manage social interactions with our patients, with dogs in general, and help our clients with that. There are things like allowing an animal consent. So you shouldn't just go and touch a dog. You should stand a little bit away, look at what the dog's mental state of mind likely is by reading body language, and ask the dog whether you can touch it, whether you can pick it up, etc., and engage with it. These are issues that our clients are reading about as well, the whole concept of consent. And if people can be more careful about that and make sure that they don't just go and touch an animal that doesn't want to be touched, we will have far fewer dogs that are aggressive in the consulting room as well. The other issue, of course, is advocacy, that our clients have a responsibility, really, to advocate for their animals' well-being. And they should be able to ask other people not to come too close if it is a dog that is really sensitive and scared of people or strange people. So these are all issues that we can assist with. And I think we all currently have pandemic puppies in our practices that are now adult dogs that were puppies during the pandemic, and that have all kinds of anxiety issues because those dogs did not have the opportunity to attend puppy classes. They did not have the opportunity to engage socially with a variety of different kinds of people and other animals, and therefore they now struggle with the results of that. So if we just integrate all of that into one slide and just think back to how human well-being is defined by these three aspects, and just remind ourselves how important the mental and the social factors also are. And then also keep in mind that these needs differ in individual animals. So there isn't a universal way that we can provide all these needs. We have to understand how it works and how it works in different animals so that we can then recognize where these issues are and how we can contribute to them. And hopefully we'll give you some tips for that for this evening. I think we can have a discussion now. Let's think a little bit about, do we really pay enough attention to the emotional and social needs of dogs? Our own dogs and dogs in general, but also our patients. What are the barriers to providing this holistic care approach? What are the biggest stressors in dogs' lives? That's quite a good question to think about, because I think a lot of it has to do with us, but also many other things. How can we minimize the impact of stress? So maybe let's start with, we'll go through it informally and quickly, but do you think that we pay enough attention to the emotional and social needs of dogs? You can say yes or no, or put up your thumb for saying yes and no if you think we're not doing enough of it. I see there's quite a few no's already. So it seems like we agree that we can do more here, and that's great because it's always good to be able to develop and grow and get better. What do you think are the main barriers to doing this? Why are we not doing it, enough of it? We try, we certainly do. I think all of us do. Time constraints. So it's a matter of rushing through a consult and not really taking the time to talk about it to the client, to show them how to deal with it, to use techniques that will calm that animal down in your consulting room. And owners will not necessarily seek veterinary advice for subtle behavior issues. Sune is absolutely right, yes. And sometimes they don't actually even know that it is an issue. If it's not a problem that affects them directly, like expensive furniture being torn apart, or the neighbors complaining about the barking, or somebody being sent to hospital because of a dog bite, they often don't pick up on the more subtle issues that do have a negative impact on the well-being of the animals. Buy-in is also important. Yes, Christina, absolutely. Time. Education. Catherine is Kate is right. We need to focus much more on education, and that takes our time, and maybe that's why we're not doing enough of that. Owner consent and understanding. Yes, okay. Owner intolerance as well, Elfrida, absolutely. Sometimes also owners have a completely different perception to ours, and then we need to also manage their expectations in terms of how they want to deal with that problem. Okay, I think we've got a fair agreement on what the obstacles are. And Vilmarie mentions that she's experienced that it works up to a point, but then we just get impatient and we do something else that doesn't take so much time. And Tanya, there's a general tendency to thinking that these soft skills are not necessary. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Soft skills in dogs and in humans. What do you think are the biggest stressors in dogs' lives? What are things that cause anxiety, stress, fear, phobia? People are a big stressor, Michelle, absolutely. Not all people in all contexts. Natalie talking about pack imbalances, or we would prefer to refer to group inter-dog or inter-dog-human interaction challenges. Other animals, yes. So we do see a lot of inter-dog aggression within households. We see a lot of fear of humans in given contexts, especially in the veterinary practice, because that is a scary place. Separation anxiety is quite a common issue. Changes in environment and changes in routine will always have some stressful impact on a dog. Some of them are resilient and they cope well, but it's very often that is the underlying reason why a behavior problem suddenly occurs. Household changes, any kind of change, humanoid habits, absolutely. Competition for resources is often an underlying issue, especially with inter-dog aggression. When animals are left alone, it's very stressful. I'm glad you mentioned that, Marcel, because dogs are social animals and they need company, just like we do when we get isolated from friends and family and engaging with people and connecting. Dogs also suffer from that kind of isolation. Inconsistencies with how animals are handled, and that boils down to poor communication. The dog doesn't understand what it's being requested to do. Strange smells can definitely be quite a problem. Yes, Raina, absolutely. And that is a very relevant comment in terms of what we're talking about this evening. And we'll talk more about it as we get along. Being left behind at home, yes, thunder and lightning up here in Gauteng, that is a huge challenge. It's very, very scary for dogs. Attachment, loss of attachment figures, physical harm. Yes, you guys are clever. I'm not going to go through all of it. These are really so many examples of stressors in dogs, and they happen all the time. So we need to be paying more attention to those. Just quickly, Bronwyn, in welfare, where our patients are free roaming, yes, and unhandled, we need to just push through and get the handling done. Yes, it's in those scenarios, it's a balance to be found between causing a short amount of acute stress for the more permanent, longer-term welfare of that animal. And we do have to make those choices. Yes, so everybody's absolutely giving us really nice input there. Lack of environmental enrichment. Yes, they need to be busy, just like we need to be busy. And there's not always a lot of knowledge about how that can be done. Own anxiety, Raisa, yes, the way they respond to inappropriate behavior. There's still a very big trend of immediately wanting to respond with punishment when a dog does something that people don't like. And in most instances, the dogs do not understand the punishment. They often link it to something completely different to what the owner thinks it's being linked to. And the punishment in itself causes anxiety because it makes the dog confused about what the owner actually is and wants. It's their attachment figure that they want to feel comfortable with, and now it's somebody who's hurting them or scaring them. And that definitely contributes to anxiety. Thank you, thank you. This is excellent, and we'll definitely look at other webinars, Alfreda. So just very quickly, so that we don't take too much time, any ideas of how we can minimize the impact of stress? Perhaps sticking with veterinary practices as vets, how can we do that? And in practices, you know, it's not always only the vet. There's the nurse and the handlers and everybody else. And Llewellyn suggests that we can start out with getting pets out to socialize, allow them the opportunity to build confidence and self-awareness, educate owners on the importance of sensory experiences for pets, absolutely. And Robin already is gunning for that lucky draw, hey, Robin? Adaptal use, but you're absolutely right. Adaptal has wonderful potential, and it works really well in a lot of anxiety cases. We need to do more about educating. We need to do more about training our staff members so that everybody's on the same page. Practice staff, I love that. Yes, thank you. Good introductions, school training, yes, definitely. I'm not going to read everything, but I love all your comments. They're really, really good. Lots of ideas about what guardians can do with their pets, fear-free principles, absolutely. The more we can do that in practices, the better. Giving appropriate advice on things like environmental enrichment, advising puppy school the very first time the client comes with that puppy, definitely. And all these other things about preventative measures that can be used to prevent these problems. Just like we vaccinate for parvo, we can vaccinate for anxiety. Thank you. Those are excellent ideas, and I think we can move on to the next section then. And here we're starting to talk about actual pheromones now. So the function, the anatomy and physiology, the way that they actually work, I think that's quite an important aspect. And one of the major function of pheromones is that they play an important role in communication. Just a quick summary of what communication is about. It's firstly about being able to identify another individual. For example, determine whether, and we're talking dogs now, okay, whether the other one is male or female. Reproductive status can be very quickly figured out with communication between dogs. Group membership, emotional status, all those sort of things. Secondly, communication in dogs is important for group organization and coordination. So it helps to avoid unnecessary tensions so that the group works efficiently with each individual able to fulfill the role that they need to fulfill. And if there's too much tension and aggression, it's not to anybody's advantage. They're wasting energy, resources, etc. Then thirdly, communication is about influencing others. And this can be referred to as manipulation of others, but very often the benefit is not just for the sender of the communication or the message, but also for the receiver. And if another animal can be influenced to behave differently for the benefit of the whole group, then that is worth being manipulated. Communication can obviously be interest-specific and interspecific. And with dogs, we have a lot of that. We need to realize that dogs are better at communicating with each other, and they're probably quite good at trying to communicate with us, but we don't always interpret their communication correctly. And that is what we've been talking about learning a bit more about that. And the misunderstanding at the interspecific level is usually not about how the signal was sent or the signal that was sent. It's about how the message is perceived by the person or the individual who's receiving that message. So in this slide, you can see two dogs just playing and tugging at a toy. In play, you often have a bit of aggression, mock aggression, we refer to it. And this is all part, especially in young dogs, of developing the social skills, of knowing how far can I go with this growl or with this bite or with the way that I engage with this individual. So let's have a look now at the different ways in which dogs communicate, just to quickly remind us of ethology again, 101. So dogs communicate visually through mainly body language, and in these slides, in the one on the left, I think it's the left, yes, we can see the two dogs. Thank you for the prompt there, Haley. Those two dogs are sniffing each other's bums. That's definitely not something that we as humans do to greet each other and to get to know each other, but those scents and pheromones are really informative, and they can very quickly figure out a lot about this other individual when they're doing that. And just interestingly, when you look at this picture of the bodies, you can see that together these two dogs almost make a circle, right? And that bending sideways of the spine is usually a good indication of a dog that is relaxed, a dog that wants to be friends, and that isn't experiencing anxiety or aggression or anything like that. Then, of course, there's the acoustic or the auditory signals that dogs use to growl, to howl, to whimper, to get the attention of the mother, and the olfactory and chemical types of communication, which we'll focus on in a moment. And of course, tactile communication. If you have dogs or cats more commonly grooming each other, allo grooming, for example, that gives a lot of information to the other individual when that happens. In the other two slides here, you can see the two dogs, the one with a play bow and the other one with a paw solicitation. They both have relaxed bodies. They both have tails that are up and not stiff. Mouths are open. They're relaxed. They're having fun. And the dogs in the bottom here are howling. Well, one of them seems to be howling. We can, in fact, what is important to note is that different channels can occur simultaneously and be contradictory and therefore cause confusion. So that's when the visual picture doesn't match what you hear or what you smell, for example. And this is an important aspect that we'll come back to a little bit later on when we're talking about how communication can sort of be spoiled by something that makes it less effective. So we've got a table here that we're not going to do in detail. This is about the biology of communication in dogs. And it's just, again, we have the 4 columns of the different ways that dogs communicate, and then we compare them. And the speed of information is one of the aspects here. Distance, over what distance can you communicate using that channel? The energy cost associated with it, the advantages and the disadvantages. So very briefly, if you look, for example, at the visual way of communicating, it's very fast, because when that animal does the play bow, it's immediate and the other dog knows what's happening. However, it can only work if they can actually see each other properly. So it won't work if they can't see each other, if there's something blocking the view, for example. The energy cost is quite expensive for visual communication because you have to do this stuff. You actually use energy to use body language. But it is a quick transfer of a lot of information. That's one of the advantages. And then a disadvantage is that the dog makes itself vulnerable to be able to show what is going on in its head. And it's not something that has a long-lasting effect. It keeps changing. The visual signals keep changing as the context changes. If you compare that now to the orange one, the olfactory channel, that's a much slower speed of information exchange. It takes longer. It can happen over a very long distance or a far distance. Yes, if they're smelling each other's bums, they need to get quite close to each other. But think about a bitch on heat that can stimulate a male dog that's quite far away. And those are olfactory signals. But it's a cheap thing. It doesn't use up a lot of energy, so it's low in energy cost. And it's not very risky to either the sender or the receiver. And the disadvantage is that you can't really control the spread of the message. It happens and that's it. So these are just examples of how the different communication channels work differently. So if we now look at pheromones and the olfactory side of things, there is a difference between normal smells or scents and pheromones. When we look at how pheromones happen or are used in communication, we are using here the example of the female dog, the bitch, and her puppy, and the way that the pheromones provide a chemical communication channel here. So pheromones are often referred to as semiochemicals, and this is why we talk about chemical communication, but even olfactory smells like meat and coffee and those sort of things are also a chemical way of communicating. So what happens with pheromones is that they are literally little particles that are released into the air by one animal and picked up by the other animal. So the sender produces them from somewhere on the skin. In the case of the appeasing pheromones, very specifically the skin of the female dog around the udder. So when she's lactating, these pheromones are released so that the puppies know where their mother is and so that they can feel safe. The puppy then picks it up through, is it the nose or is it not the nose? That's what we'll talk about now. And we can go to the next slide. I just want to point out to you here that the book Stress and Pheromonotherapy in Small Animal Clinical Behavior is an excellent book if you're interested in this topic. A lot of what we're talking about in this presentation comes from that book. There's also other sources that we have used, and we'll get to those a little bit later on. And I believe that that is part of the prize that the 10 lucky people will get this evening. So please remember to look at those questions and answer them before the end of the webinar, and you might then be one of the lucky winners of a great prize. And this is a great prize. So what is the anatomy of olfaction? If we look at this, this is obviously not a perfectly exact representation of the anatomy. Just look at the colors basically, and not what the shapes look like. So if we start at the bottom of this picture, the vomeronasal organ in the blue, in the sort of turquoisey blue color, is situated in the top of the palate of a dog and a cat. And if you look at the photograph in the top right-hand corner where the arrow is, this is obviously a dog lying on its back. So we're looking at the top section of the jaw, and that is more or less where the vomeronasal organ, the VNO, is situated. Above that, in the actual nose, is the respiratory epithelium, which is the green label on this picture. The olfactory epithelium is linked to that, and just behind that, also in the nasal area. The accessory olfactory bulb is the gray circle, and the olfactory bulb is the yellow one. And those are both part of the brain already. And then the olfactory cortex is the gray, the bluish teal. It's a teal color that is in the brain, and it's part of the cortex, so it's part of the cognitive brain. And then there's the limbic system, the purple label, which is inside the brain, and that is the part of the brain that processes emotions. I think if we go to the next slide, we can show you how the scents are processed versus how pheromones are processed. So normal scents that we can all smell, that were not left there by another dog in order to communicate with this dog, they go through the nose, the respiratory epithelium, the olfactory epithelium, and they go specifically through the olfactory bulb to the olfactory cortex, whereas the pheromones are processed differently. So they are absorbed or taken up via the vomeronasal organ to the accessory olfactory bulb in the brain, and then to the limbic system. And that explains why they have such a profound effect on behavioral conditions like anxiety. If we move on, we'll be able to see the summary. Okay, we've done that one. Here we've got the summary of how pheromones then have their behavioral response. So there's first an emotional response, that of safety. The animal feels safe. Remember that the puppies, when they're born, they cannot see or hear. All they have is the mom's pheromones to make them feel they're in the right place, and they're in the place where they will get food and where they will be looked after and protected. So that happens in the limbic system. That then leads to a behavioral response, which could be suckling, it could be sleeping comfortably, or relaxing. So the example we've used here is that of the appeasing pheromone. We can go on to the next slide. And this is just one type of pheromone, because there are different pheromones. There are pheromones that will decrease arousal, and here we're talking about physiological arousal. And normally high arousal levels are linked to anxiety and fear and those sort of emotions. The pheromones are released from sites in the skin, and if you look at the photograph of the dog in this slide, if you see all the little green spots, those are different areas on the body where they release pheromones. And the dog appeasing pheromone is specifically released in the intramammary sulcus, the skin between the two sides of the udder. And that will then cause a reduction in anxiety and fear and provide a sense of safety. So there are several appeasing pheromones. What's important is to know that pheromones are species specific. So a dog pheromone has an effect on a dog. A cat pheromone will not have an effect on a dog. The other types of pheromones are the sex and alarm pheromones that increase arousal, because they either lead to reproductive activity or they lead to animals taking action to avoid harm. And then they are also released from various places on the body, and they provide more of a sense of danger, or at least then in the case of sex pheromones, work to be done, if we will. And I think I've mentioned that sometimes pheromones are referred to as semiochemicals. So the real effect that pheromones have, and the pheromones we're talking about this evening, is to provide in two extremely important needs of dogs and other social animals, and that is to have a safe haven, in other words, a place where they feel safe and where they can relax and do normal things that normal dogs do, where they are free from harm, where they can feel that they're in control. And then they need a secure base, as in a relationship with another individual. And this secure base is often referred to as an attachment figure. The mother will be the first secure base, and as the puppies then grow up and they move into a home, away from the littermates and the dam, they then build up a new relationship with an owner or a family of people, sometimes another animal. And they need these attachment figures for normal development to take place and for them to be as resilient as possible. So if this attachment figure is not providing that feeling of safety for them and supporting them, it will lead to problems. And this is when owners are punishing their dogs, for example, that it causes confusion and that dog doesn't understand what's going on. And that leads to a variety of possible behavior issues. So what we are talking about now is the products that you can buy that are basically synthetic pheromones. So they've taken these pheromones that the bitch releases for her puppies, and they've made them in a laboratory, put them in a bottle, and this is now referred to as synthetic dog appeasing pheromone. So that DAP is the DAP in the word adaptol, which is the name of the product that uses dog appeasing pheromone. So what they do is they send a new message from the environment, and that new message changes the dog's emotional state, as we said, and then the subsequent behavior that we see. So just to show you again properly what this looks like, you can already see it at the top there of the presentation. But the product used to be called DAP, and then it changed to Adaptil. And we'll, in the next section, after a little bit of a discussion, we will tell you more about the actual product, the different formulations, what they work for, what they don't work for, and how they should be used. So we can have a discussion. And just to make sure that we all understand the concept of emotional bias, because that is what pheromones do. They create an environment in which the animal feels different. So some of you will probably identify with being a cup half full person. Others might be more cup half empty people. Would you like to indicate in the chat box what you think you are? And I think some people are cup half empty people sometimes, and cup half full people, half full other times. But what it really means is that if you're a cup half full person, you tend to be more optimistic about what is going on. And if you're a cup half empty person, you tend to be more pessimistic. It probably won't go well today, as opposed to it probably will go well today when I meet this new vet, or whatever the case might be if you're a dog. So yeah, it's interesting to see how you all identify. So I hope that it clarifies a little bit what we mean with the principle of bias. And I think maybe we can just chat a little bit about that, just to make sure that everybody understands that. And maybe you can think of examples of how this will then apply to dog behavior. If we can just change the way the dog perceives something a little bit so that they then relax more. What are those things? And what are other examples maybe where there's a negative bias that you can think of, or even where you've experienced bias yourself? Can you think of any examples like that? I see we've still got half full sounds more positive, says Annalie. Yes, it does, doesn't it? But if you're a more cautious individual, you may be more likely to see the risks inherent in a situation. And the person who's the cup half full will be like, but why are you so negative? It's okay, you know. So it may be the exact same situation that we are experiencing, but our bias is different. Francois says it depends on what's in the cup. Yes, absolutely. Llewellyn says, I can see that my dog picks up on me when I'm anxious. I think I can definitely understand how they are feeling when they are scared. And your anxiety probably then creates a negative bias for your dog, because then they're like, okay, what's wrong? He's not comfortable, so there's got to be something wrong. Liesel says, when you assume one animal will behave the same as another, and they don't. Absolutely, yes. Because each animal is different. Remember their genetics, their personality, the way the experiences that they've had in their lives up until then would be different, even if they grow up in the same house. Grateful to have a cup. Good for you, Natalie. Alfreda says, aim for a benchmark. Targeting with a scope of solution. Yeah, so the bias can relate to cause and effect, most certainly, yes. And dogs do pick up on our bias. Anything you'd like to add, Aileen, and then you can continue with the next section. And you can just read Tanya's message.
So Tanya said, if I have had a bad experience, if I've had a bad experience with a breed, then I anticipate that all dogs of that breed will be the same, especially with regards to aggression. Yes, I think that's something that vets commonly experience, Tanya. And I think the one thing I just want to mention about bias is that it's especially important when it applies to ambiguous information. So dogs can obviously have a learnt experience about something, but if there's information coming from the environment that's ambiguous, like this person approaching me, right? And they've obviously got all the experiences that they've had with people in the past as part of their life history. So now this person approaching them, they're like, are they coming to give me a treat, or are they coming to put a collar on me, or are they coming to put a thermometer up my bum, right? So it's about how they then interpret ambiguous information. And a lot of times when we are trying to impact an animal's behavior, what we're trying to do is shift their bias to a more positive bias, where they are more likely to interpret ambiguous information as being positive instead of interpreting that as being negative. Because obviously an interpretation of ambiguous information as being negative is then going to create or engender a stress and an anxious response from that. Okay, Llewellyn said, I think it's important to take each dog individually, and I think it's important to try and have an idea on background of the dog if possible. Yes, absolutely. The dog's life history plays a huge role in how they respond to what's going on in their environment. So let's delve into the role of pheromones in behavior management. So when should we be using pheromone therapy, and what is the correct use of pheromones? And I think it's important to just talk about how behavior can be characterized in a continuum, right? There's behavior doesn't occur in little discrete boxes, and you're all familiar with bell curves. So even within a litter of puppies, we can have most of the puppies that cluster in the middle in terms of their confidence or their playfulness or their energy levels, but there will always be outliers, and it's just how sort of extreme those outliers are that that produces the sort of behavioral diversity that we see. So, and it's also important that we're not just seeing sort of like one version of abnormal, right? So like this is the normal behavior of a dog, and so if I see this, then it's abnormal. Abnormal behavior can span the continuum. Let me try and elucidate that a little bit more clearly. So, for instance, a dog who chews sticks and toys and chew toys, that's normal behavior that we expect from dogs, right? It's part of their ethogram. It's part of their basic behavior. So a dog who chews everything and anything, right, we can think of as one extreme of abnormal. And whether that is because they are extremely bored and have no enrichment, or whether they are extremely anxious and are using chewing as a way to self-soothe, we don't know. But the point is that behavior of chewing everything and anything is abnormal. We can also have abnormal behavior in a dog who never chews anything, even when they're offered a tasty chew toy. And I see so many patients in my practice where the owner goes, "Oh, my dog doesn't play. No, my dog's never played." Right? Play is, again, is obviously very old dogs, senior dogs, as their energy levels, they become a little bit less interested in play. But play is something that we should see all dogs engaging in if they have good welfare. Equally, a dog who is interested in sniffing new people, that's a very normal behavioral response from a dog because they process the world through their noses. And then we might have a dog who is extremely fearful of and avoiding new people, and that would be, one extreme of abnormal. But we might also have a dog who's completely over the top with meeting new people, jumping on them, being extremely boisterous, and doesn't respond to the social cues, of the person trying to back away or turn their back on them. It's just like going completely crazy. And sometimes we normalize that kind of behavior, like, "Oh, he's so friendly," or, "Oh, sorry, he's just a little bit boisterous," without recognizing that that's maybe a bit of abnormal behavior, and that dog is using that behavioral response to cope with something in the environment that is stressing them out. So especially your sort of gun breeds, your gun dog breeds like labbies and golden retrievers, they often use extreme appeasing behavior and submissive behavior as a way to cope when they're feeling quite stressed. And then a person goes, "Oh, look how friendly they are," and, "Oh, look, they just showing me their tummy for a big scratch." Meanwhile, the dog's like, "Oh my word, like I'm really stressed out and anxious about this interaction with you, and this is the only way that I kind of know how to deal with that." Now, the severity and complexity of the problem will dictate what sort of treatment and management is necessary. So, for example, if you see a puppy for second vaccination and they're extremely fearful of novelty and won't let you touch them, and freak out when you pick them up and put them on the table, and just don't recover, won't accept a treat from you, that is likely a puppy who's going to need psychotropic medication as part of their treatment plan. On the other hand, you might have a puppy who's just a little bit timid at puppy classes, and they take a little bit of time to approach new people, and that puppy may just need an adaptable collar to help them feel a little bit more confident. And then a puppy who is, for instance, just mouthing in people's hands and, being a bit of a piranha puppy, that puppy may just need some training and appropriate chew toys. So the message here is that a behavior management plan is tailored to the problem that we have. We shouldn't just be handing out medication for everything. We shouldn't be dismissing medication for everything and just saying, "Oh, we can just use behavior modification." And we shouldn't think that pheromones are going to solve everything. So there are different behavior management modalities. And generally, a behavior treatment plan will have consistent of a combination of these things. So changing the environment so that that it's not triggering the behavioral response that we don't want. Managing the triggers for that behavior. So if your dog is jumping on visitors as they are trying to come into your home, you can try putting your dog behind a barrier or into a room until the visitors have come in, and then allow the dog to come and greet them. That is managing the trigger of the high excitement caused by visitors arriving. We can enhance relaxation and learning through the use of medication. We can use pheromonotherapy, and we can teach the dog a new behavior. And sometimes teaching the dog a new behavior requires the previous two things, requires enhanced relaxation and pheromonotherapy in order to get the dog into a mental state that allows them to actually learn something new. So pheromones can really be a part of an integrated approach to behavior management. And for instance, puppies who are in the socialization period, which occurs from 4 to 12 weeks of age. Now, you will recognize that puppies at 4 weeks of age are still with the breeder. So you should really be encouraging all the breeders within your practice, especially the very good and dedicated ones, to be making use of the pheromone product as a way to, as Quixie said earlier, to vaccinate those puppies against becoming very fearful and anxious with things such as handling and vet visits. So prevention is better than cure. We know this when it comes to physical health. We know this when it comes to social health. That's why we recommend puppy classes. But we can also then think about how can we prevent problems from occurring when it comes to mental health. Another extremely important developmental period is teenagerdom, all right, when dogs are teenagers. And this occurs between the ages of 6 and 12 months of age. And during this time, there is a lot of brain rewiring that's going on, and we can often have a secondary fear period that occurs, especially towards the beginning of this period. And unfortunately, that often coincides with us sterilizing those animals. So putting them through a very scary, traumatic situation, coming to the hospital, leaving mom behind or dad and being with the staff there, going into perhaps a noisy hospital environment, having just handling them, and then waking up from anesthetic. I don't know if any of you have woken up from an anesthetic recently, but it is an extremely unpleasant experience, especially if you're not surrounded by people that you know and are familiar with you and who can be there to support you. So for this dog waking up from this anesthetic and feeling very disorientated and a bit weird and possibly a bit sore, that combination of things can be extremely stressful. So again, prevention is better than cure. For things such as physical health, we will be advocating parasite control. For things like social health, we will be advocating for training classes so that people can learn how to manage their dogs more in a better manner. And then for mental health, we can again be advocating the use of pheromones to help dogs cope with stressful events. So what can we use Adaptil for? Now, if you haven't yet heard of Jaak Panksepp, please make sure that you do. Many of your clients may have read about Jaak Panksepp and the work that he did. And he did very important work showing that all mammals have the neural anatomy that enables them to experience core emotions. So really, this is a changing field. 40 years ago, researchers were arguing about whether animals were capable of feeling emotions. Now the arguments are which of the complex emotions are animals capable of experiencing. And what Jaak Panksepp showed is that these core emotions, we have the neural circuitry for them, so therefore they must be able to experience those emotions. And the three negative ones are fear, rage, and panic. And panic is also referred to as panic grief. This is the emotion that is activated when the individual is separated from their primary attachment figure. So if you think about that young, helpless puppy whose, eyes have just opened and can't yet hear anything, can't properly thermoregulate yet, can't find their own food, if they get separated from the mother, they need to reestablish contact with the mother as quickly as possible to ensure their survival. And so the emotion that is generated, that emotion of panic, and also known as panic grief, is what triggers that behavior of looking for the mother, whimpering, crying, howling, so that the mother will come and find them and take them back to a place of safety. And so this is where the adult emotion of grief comes from, when we get separated from a primary attachment figure, a parent, a spouse, a loved one, a best friend, whether it's temporary separation or permanent. That emotion that we experience is an activation of this emotional system. So the two systems where appeasing pheromones will be able to exert an effect are on fear and panic grief. It is unlikely that pheromones are going to have an impact on some of the other emotional systems, and we'll talk about that now. So short-term situations that create stress, things like car travel, social interactions, veterinary visits, those all involve the emotions of fear, or can involve the emotions of fear. And then long-term situations that cause stress may be separation from the secure base. So, moving to a new home, a new environment, bringing a new baby into the household, bringing a new animal in. So any kinds of stresses in the environment, such as loud noises with thunderstorms or fireworks. Renovations, having workers coming in and out of the home, changes in the household. These are all things that can cause a lot of stress, and where a product like Adaptil is likely to make a very big difference to the animal's perception of that experience. So the different formulations that are available, we have the diffuser, which lasts for 30 days. So you buy the diffuser unit with a refill in the pack. So it's one unit that lasts for 30 days. And at the end of that 30 days, you can take out the bottle, throw it away, or recycle it, and then put in a new refill to continue for another 30 days. The thing with the diffuser is it needs to be placed strategically. So it covers 50 to 70 square meters. And so for somebody who's got a very big house, they might need to use multiple diffusers. It's probably not going to work well in summer if they've put it in their lounge and they've got the sliding door wide open and all the windows open. So using it in an environment where the pheromone actually has a chance to build up to the levels that will be detectable to the dog. And it has to be plugged in a way that the pheromone can diffuse freely around the room. So not plugging it behind a couch or under a coffee table somewhere. That's not going to give a very good effect. The collar, you get two collars. There were three. There was the junior for puppies, but that's been discontinued in South Africa. So you get the small to medium, and then the medium to large. So those two collar sizes. They also last for 30 days. And a very important point here, if you're selling a collar to an owner, you must explain to them that the collar needs to be quite tight. I've seen many pet parents have degrees of collar looseness with their dog's normal collar. So from having a snug collar to one that's like flopping all around. And an Adaptil collar that's flopping all around is not going to work as well, because it relies on the body heat of the dog to warm the collar up and aerosolize that pheromone. Then we have the spray formulation. And one of those bottles contains, I don't know if you can see the picture, it says there are 50 uses. A use is not one pump, it's about 5 to 6 pumps. So if you take a bandana or a blanket and you pump in 5 or 6 times onto it, that is considered one use for that product. And you can spray it into the environment directly or onto a bandana or a neck scarf that you put around the dog's neck. And obviously works very well for travel. That's why it's referred to as the travel spray, but it can also be used in the home. If you're trying to get a dog comfortable with sleeping somewhere else, the pet parents are expecting a baby and they don't want the dog to sleep in the bedroom. They'd like them to sleep in another room or in the lounge. Then, they could spray the dog's bedding every night with Adaptil to help them to get comfortable with that. The collar is ideal for pets that move between indoors and outdoors. And as I said, the diffuser is ideal when the problem is within a fixed indoor space. All right, now Adaptil use in the veterinary practice. So this is my personal opinion, but patients who are coming for any sort of elective surgery, sterilization, dental, orthopedic, as I've just indicated, those types of experiences are filled with a lot of stress, okay? And I believe that those patients should have an Adaptil collar put on them a few days before the procedure. And then, as I've said, it lasts for 30 days. So then they've also got it in the post-operative recovery period. especially for something like orthopedics, where they have to be kept quiet and possibly in a situation that they're not used to. For instance, being kept in a crate and they're not quite used to a crate yet, or having to only go on lead walks, instead of being able to run around the garden. So I think that, thinking about something like that, if somebody is paying several thousand rand for an operation, you can talk to them about adding this in as a way to help their pet to cope with something stressful like that. The diffuser can obviously be used in the reception and the hospital area, particularly the hospital area where you've got lots of dogs who are sitting there away from their primary attachment figures. And as Quixie explained to you earlier, how important a primary attachment figure is for a dog. And they're all sitting there, and if you've got one stressed individual who's sitting there and exuding all their alarm pheromones and stressing all the other patients out, again, if you've ever been in a hospital stay and there's been a patient in a ward close to you that's got poor pain management and is wailing and being quite upset, you know how much that can stress you out. The spray is very nice for using on your clothes and hands. It is in an alcohol base, so it's like a free hand sanitizer as well. And you can put that on prior to the consult. So remember that it is in an alcohol base. You need to give it a few seconds for that alcohol to evaporate so that you don't sting the dog's nose with that. And you may not have to use this for every patient. You may know that, your next patient who comes in has come for lots of visits to the practice and loved you and always gets treats and gives you lots of cuddles and that. But if you know that you've got a patient who the last time, because you noted it in your notes, was very fearful, then you may want to use Adaptil there as a way to help that patient cope. So when may Adaptil not work? So when the problem behavior, for problem behaviors where fear, anxiety, or distress are not the underlying emotion, Adaptil is unlikely to have an effect. And this is why it's also important to recommend products appropriately, because if you to work with and they don't work, then the owner goes, you were just trying to make money off of me. I'm not going to listen to your future recommendations. So as I said earlier, it's not a fix all. When we have, for instance, destructive behavior and barking that are due to boredom or lack of exercise, putting an Adaptil collar on that dog is not really going to make a difference, right? If, however, the destructive behavior is because the dog is experiencing extreme anxiety and stress when their owner is leaving them alone, then obviously Adaptil will help, right? Jumping up and digging, it's unlikely to have an effect on that because those are motivated by the seeking emotion, so that exploratory drive. And again, Adaptil is unlikely to make much of a difference there. And when behavior has a strong learned component, and this goes back to our discussion about bias. Bias is influenced by every encounter that we have, right? So if you have a bias, as Tanya mentioned, you've been bitten by a Rottweiler once, and now you're like, all Rottweilers are, hell spawn. And then you have a series of beautiful Rottweilers that come to your practice, and they're all like smushy and lovely and friendly. And you have enough experiences with smushy, lovely Rottweilers, you may change your bias towards Rottweilers. So that repeated kind of exposure can influence your bias. That works in the other way as well, right? So in the opposite direction. So if we have a strong learnt component, so every time I come to the practice, I get jabbed with really sharp needles and nobody gives me a cookie afterwards, or while I'm being jabbed with a sharp needle, then even if you are using Adaptil, that might not be enough to have an effect on that dog's behavior, because they've got such a strong learned component to the behavior. That the vet practice is scary now, and there we need to then be applying a little bit more behavioral modification or environmental management to be changing that dog's approach. Now, when it comes to evidence and proving efficacy, if you do any kind of literature review on pheromone products, and really Adaptil is the only dog appeasing pheromone product on the market, you will find evidence that Adaptil works, but you will also find some evidence that it doesn't. So it is worth talking about the fact that when we evaluate any research regarding animal behavior, there are some caveats, right? As I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation, standardization of terms. If different researchers are using different terms to talk about anxiety or stress or fear or phobia, then it makes it very hard to perform any kind of meta-analysis, right? Because when we want to look at multiple studies, and this is a problem particularly with something like separation anxiety. There's a very good paper published by Daniel Mills and his team a couple of years ago, where they really looked at this term separation anxiety and what it's kind of become, and what the literature kind of says about it and how various experts interpret it. And really it's a little bit of a problematic term, because not everybody uses it the same. They use it to describe different behavior, and there is a continuum of behavior. And what they showed is that there are different underlying emotions. It's not always just pure anxiety or pure fear that is motivating some of these behaviors. So standardization of terms is very important. Then how the study has measured the behavior. A lot of studies rely on owner-reported behavior, and as we all agreed on at the beginning, owners are not always the best at interpreting their dog's behavior. I've seen that even for people who come to my behavior practice, and then say, oh, but I don't think, he's so stressed out about, X that we happen to be talking about. I'm like, but can't you see that he's stressed out? So owners not always don't always have the knowledge to be able to interpret their dog's behavior accurately. But to have an expert review video footage is extremely time consuming and costly. And so that then impacts sample size, right? So then you have studies that maybe only look at a handful of animals. And then homogeneity of subjects is extremely important, because if we accept that behavior is as a result of the interaction between the animal's genetics, their environment, and their experiences and learning, it becomes very difficult to find a homogeneous sample. So even within a litter of puppies, each of those puppies has a slightly different genetic makeup. Even though they're exposed to the same environment, the environment is not exactly the same, right? The owner may have, the breeder may have a preference for this puppy because they look prettier, and so they may handle them a little bit more. And over time, those minor changes compound to create bigger changes. So this makes it very difficult then to say, okay, in my population of beagles, and beagles are the kind of like standard dogs that they use in laboratory science, laboratory research for dogs. Even if I have a group of beagles, that doesn't mean that I have a homogeneous sample, because each of those beagles has had slightly different experiences as they grow up. So it's just something to think about when you are reading literature and coming across studies and that, and when you are evaluating any product that purports to have an impact on behavior. This is something that you should be thinking about. So just very briefly, just because it says pheromones, don't assume that it is the right pheromone. And there are many products available, such as nutraceuticals, plants and herbs, and non-species specific pheromone products. And the thing that we want to just say here is that even though those ingredients have been tested and shown to have some sort of effect, the actual product on the shelf hasn't necessarily undergone the same level of testing to demonstrate efficacy in dogs. And that is where a product like Adaptil stands out above the rest, because it is the Adaptil product itself that has undergone many clinical trials in order to show its efficacy in specific situations. All right, so we are nearing the end, and I think that Kate is just going to have a quick discussion about this slide, and then we will have our last discussion and end off and do the lucky and announce the lucky winners.
So good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kate. I'm the sales consultant for SIVA Animal Health, and I'm quite happy to take you through this slide. Just essentially looking at the costing aspect of Adaptil. So it's never an exact science, because I think we all realize the practice is purchased from different wholesalers. You have different levels of markups. So this is just an example. And if you look at, if I can call it the worst case scenario, you're looking at an Adaptil medium to large color or the Adaptil diffuser, and that's the starter kit as well as the refill. You're looking at it costing what approximately a loaf of bread would actually cost. So I think it's quite a real comparison because that's really a commodity, and quite closely costed to some of the other calming products on the market, even though those calming products may sometimes be prescribed for a shorter period of time, whereas you may get better efficacy if they are prescribed for a longer period of time. So really not horrendously priced. And once again, this depends on the wholesale and depends on the practice markup which you implement in your particular practice or organization. Are there any questions? Thanks, Aileen. That's me.
So Kate, I mean, I can answer this one. Amy's just asking, are the small and medium large collars safe to use in puppies now that the junior has been discontinued? So I don't know if you want to answer that, Kate.
Yeah, so they're absolutely safe. In fact, now that the junior collar has been discontinued, your alternative option would be the use of the small collar. The only difference is that it's slightly, very, very slightly wider. It is the same length, 37.5 centimeters, and it's black in color. But otherwise, it has exactly the same concentration of pheromone and can be used in very, very young puppies. Aileen was referring to puppies as young as 4 weeks, and I've been in some practices where vets are actually seeing puppies brought in for the first vaccination at the age of 4 weeks. So yeah, there's absolutely no problem in using them in very, very young pups.
Thanks, Kate. So our final discussion, and I realize that we are rapidly approaching the end of our time allocation with you. So what would you like to use Adaptil for if you don't already use it, or maybe you just want to comment on where you are already using it and if you've had, what successes you've had with that, and what are the advantages of using the pheromone products, and then any general questions that you have. I see there's nothing that's currently open in the Q&A box. So if you have questions now, you can pop them in there, and then we can maybe have the prize winners coming up next. But Greta is saying she would like to use it for heavy weather. Yes, I think certainly a lot of dogs who are sound sensitive and maybe starting to develop a bit of a thunderstorm phobia. So they're not yet at the point where they have a thunderstorm phobia, but they just do get a little bit anxious when they hear thunder or heavy wind. A lot of patients that I've seen react to the blinds rattling, so when the wind starts to blow and the blinds rattle against the window, that can be a big sort of trigger for them. So using it like that. Gabriella said, I use it for New Year fireworks in Germany. Yes, that's great, Gabrielle, because again, even if a dog is not showing a phobic response to fireworks, fireworks are very loud and can be extremely stressful for them. Sinead saying, I want to use it for my own dogs to keep them comfortable while I'm at work. That's great, Sinead, especially if they, if you've got noisy neighbors or, sometimes the garbage truck. So if you've got a dog that doesn't like a bin day, then having a bandana and spraying some Adaptil onto the bandana on bin day before you leave for work is a great option. Veronica saying crate training assistance, especially recovering patients. Yes, absolutely. We think that being in a crate, and for dogs who have always experienced a crate as a safe haven, where they have learned to be in a crate from being a puppy, being in a crate is fine for them. But for an adult dog who's not used to the concept, and sometimes then is being put in a crate because they are post-surgery and are recovering for them. So using an Adaptil would be great in that scenario. Marcel, a dog traveling overseas, and absolutely, like I always used to try and recommend the collars, but a lot of the airlines won't allow the dogs to wear any kind of collar on the airplane. And so you can then use the spray on a blanket, and it lasts for about 5 hours. So might not last for the whole trip, but if the dog is having a layover, you can always ask them to reapply that. Dogs traveling on holiday, yes. Holidays are exciting, but they can even be stressful for the humans who know what's going on. So they can also be stressful for dogs. Rebecca is asking, how would you know if excessive barking while the owner is out is due to anxiety or boredom? So, Rebecca, oftentimes anxiety is accompanied by other signs. So the dog won't eat or drink. If the owner says, oh, my dog doesn't eat while I'm out, but as soon as I get home, they go and they polish off their food, for is leaving food out, then that might be one of the indications. And if the dog is extremely excited when the owner returns home, that could be another indication. So if they're showing any kind of anxiety or distress signs when the owner is leaving, and then when the owner returns home, this extreme excitement and taking a long time to kind of settle down, that's going to point you more in the direction of an anxious patient versus one who's just bored. Kiki saying a diffuser in the consulting room, especially for felines, yes, with the Feliway. And she's also saying she loves using it for travel, yes. Christina says we're using it in our dog and cat and dog wards at the clinic I work at. There's definitely a difference in the pet's overall behavior with it on. Excellent. Laura saying new dog introduction into the household. Absolutely. And Liesel saying multi-dog households. All right. And then, yeah, boredom is a great culprit. Okay, I don't know. Did I stop sharing my screen accidentally, or did our time expire?
I put you off through. You can just share again. And then there's 2 more questions in the Q&A. Sorry, Arlene.
Okay, all right. Okay. Then in the Q&A, okay, so is it okay to use Feliway for cats and Adaptil for dogs in the same area? Will Adaptil be effective in a reception area that has open doors? So Evelyn, yes, you can use Feliway and Adaptil in the same area. As Quixie said earlier, species specific, so the Feliway will not be biologically important to the dog, and the Adaptil won't be recognized as a communication signal by the cats. And in a reception area that has open doors, I think if they're open all the time, that's probably not going to be as effective, depending on the design of the reception area. So if you've got like your open doors and then you've got more of like a closed shop section, you could maybe put the diffuser more there so that as it builds up its maximum sort of quantity there. And then obviously some of it is going to diffuse out of the open door. Unless you have those fancy aircon machines that sort of like blow an airstream down to keep cool air in or hot air in and vice versa, then that obviously acts as an effective air curtain, and would do that for the diffuser as well. All right, and then Janet is asking, are licky mats effective for relief of stress and anxiety? Janet, certainly there is an indication that licking is a soothing behavior for dogs, and for a dog who's food motivated, giving them something to eat immediately produces a positive emotional response. So combining those two things, yes. Oftentimes when dogs are stressed enough, they won't eat, in which case giving them a licky mat and them going, no, I don't want this, can actually be an indication that they're stressed. I use that with my own dog. Like if I'm feeding him treats and we're approaching a trigger, the point where he's no longer willing to take the treats tells me that that's how close he can get to the trigger, and now we have to work at that level or back up and work at a level that he's more comfortable with. So eating can be a nice indication of how a dog is experiencing. Catherine's made a very important point here. In the consulting room, if the dog urinates or defecates, could one clean the area with a non-ammonia containing agent and spray some Adaptil spray over the area? Yes, that's definitely. I've seen patients where having an extremely fearful patient just before them was actually the sort of start of their extreme vet aversion that they developed. All right, and then our last slide is just the important takeaways. So fear and anxiety are emotions that cause stress, usually distress. As we've reiterated, health encompasses mental and social or emotional aspects too, not just physical health. Pheromones are important in communication. They are processed differently to normal smells, and they have an impact on emotional state and therefore behavior. And pheromones can be used to support positive emotional health and as a preventative against anxiety and fear conditions from developing. So these are some of the references that we used. And obviously, if you need to go watch the replay or the live YouTube, if you want to go and get any of those references and have a read through them, there's some really interesting ones there. And now on to what you've all been waiting for, the winners of the lucky draw. Who's going to do that?
Catherine will do it.
Rwanda, are you doing that? Okay, so Kate.
You just need to unmute, Kate.
Hopefully she's not reading them to herself.
Kate, please unmute.
Kate's computer's decided that she must not announce the winners.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay, so we have 10 winners, as said. So the first winner we have is Dr. Dina Mannix. Congratulations. You'll be receiving your stress and pheromonotherapy book, as well as a full-size bottle of adaptable transport spray. Our next winner is Chanel Oliver. And then we have Vilmarie de Toy. We have Marcel Snyman, Elfrida Alberts, Robin Hodis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I do apologize if I'm not. Bronwyn van Dijk, Renee Swart, Patricia Reeve, and Anne McKenzie. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to complete our questionnaire.
Congratulations, everyone. And thank you for your time and attention and listening to Quixie and I and all your wonderful interaction and questions. It's always wonderful to have a webinar where everybody is so engaged. So thank you for being with us this evening and giving us your time.
Leanne, if I can just quickly add, sorry, Quixie, just regarding the prize winners, we'll be in touch with you personally and make arrangements to get those prizes to you. So that will happen in the next week or so. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.